My name is Peter Sanders. If you're hearing this, then the archives were never sealed as they should have been. Here, we collect fragments of stories that were never meant to surface. Voices caught on tape, memories burned into static. Welcome to the Lost Tapes Department.
They say curiosity is harmless, that it's the fuel of collectors, of hobbyists, of people like me who can't stop digging into the forgotten corners of the past. I used to believe that. I used to believe that everything could be explained with enough patience, enough rewinding and pausing, enough logic. But that was before I found the tape. My name isn't important. What matters is that I've spent years searching for what most people would call junk: dusty vinyls, scratched CDs, boxes of unmarked cassettes. If it had static, distortion, or the smell of damp cardboard, I wanted it. My apartment shelves are lined with relics of dead media, each one a little piece of history rescued from the trash. It was raining that day. The kind of steady, gray drizzle that makes neon signs blur and puddles shimmer like broken mirrors. I ducked into a thrift store I'd never noticed before, wedged between a pawn shop and a boarded-up bakery. The sign above the door was cracked, its letters half burned out, spelling nothing coherent. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and dust baked into old wood. The place was empty. No chatter, no background music, just the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Rows of sagging shelves bent under the weight of discarded lives. Chipped porcelain dolls, yellowed paperbacks, tangled VHS tapes in broken cases. I felt at home. That's when I saw it. A cardboard box sat on the floor, shoved under a rack of outdated coats. Most of the tapes inside were labeled with black marker. Wedding 92, Christmas Party, Super Bowl. Normal. But one case stood out. It was plain. No cover art, no title, no stickers. Just a cracked black shell, heavier than the others, as if the tape itself carried some weight it shouldn't. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. The plastic was cold, colder than it had any right to be in that stuffy room. Not that one. The voice came from behind the counter. I hadn't even noticed the store clerk until then. An older man, thin, with a face folded into too many lines. His eyes were buried in shadow, impossible to read under the flickering light. "What do you mean?" I asked. "That tape was never meant to be sold," he said. His voice was flat, like he was reciting something he'd repeated too many times before. I laughed nervously. "Everything in here's for sale, isn't it?" He didn't answer. He just watched me. His lips pressed together, his hands tightening around the edge of the counter as if he was holding something back. I shrugged, tossing a crumpled dollar on the counter. "Guess it's mine now." The man didn't move to take the money. For a moment I thought he'd stop me, maybe snatch the tape away. But he didn't. He just whispered something, too quiet for me to catch, and turned his back. By the time I stepped back out into the rain, I felt a strange heat on my palm, as though the tape had burned me. I told myself it was nothing. Just the chill of the store, the awkwardness of the clerk. At home, I set the tape on top of my VCR. It sat there like a dare. A single black shape in the dim light of my living room. I tried to ignore it. I made dinner, flipped through a book, scrolled my phone. But my eyes kept drifting back to it as if the thing was pulling at me. By midnight, I couldn't resist anymore. I slid the tape into the VCR. The machine whirred, a little louder than usual. Static filled the screen, thick and hungry. The sound buzzed like angry bees inside my skull. I leaned closer, the hairs on my arms lifting. For a moment, buried in the static, I thought I heard something. A word. My name. Then the picture cleared. It showed a room. An empty, windowless room. The wallpaper was pale, peeling in strips. In the center sat a single wooden chair, facing the camera. No movement, no sound. Just the chair, perfectly still, as if it had been waiting for me. I sat frozen, watching. Minutes passed. Nothing changed. And then, without warning, the tape cut to black. The screen reflected my own pale face back at me, mouth slightly open, eyes wide. That was it. That was all. Or at least that's what I thought. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the chair, plain, wooden, waiting in a room that didn't belong anywhere. By morning, I convinced myself it was nothing. Just some weird art project or a home video taped over something else. Still, when I got home from work, the first thing I did was press play again. The tape whirred to life. Static filled the room louder than I remembered. The hairs on my neck stood as if the air itself was charged. Then once again the room appeared. The chair. Silent. Motionless. But it wasn't the same. I leaned forward, squinting. The wallpaper, I could swear it was different. Yesterday it had been plain and pale. Now faint patterns were showing through, as though the image had sharpened overnight. And in the corner of the frame I thought I saw something. A darker patch, not quite a shadow, shifting like it was alive. My hand hovered over the remote. Pause. Rewind. Play. Every time I replayed it, the image seemed to change just a little more. Details I hadn't seen before began surfacing. Cracks in the floorboards, the outline of a door half hidden behind peeling wallpaper, a faint shimmer of movement in the background. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just tired. But each time I replayed it, something new appeared. The tape wasn't fixed. It was evolving. At one point, I paused the image on the chair itself. The wood looked old, splintered at the edges. But that wasn't what froze me. It was the seat, the indent in the cushion. Someone had been sitting there. I felt it. No, I knew it. The silence of my apartment pressed against me. My own chair creaked when I shifted, as if answering the one on the screen. I stood up quickly, suddenly aware of every shadow in the room. I should have stopped. Should have unplugged the VCR, tossed the tape out the window, anything. But obsession is louder than reason. I pressed play again. For a long stretch, nothing happened. Just the empty chair staring back. I almost laughed at myself for being so worked up. But then, at the edge of the frame, something flickered. A blur. My heart stumbled. I rewound, played it back in slow motion. Yes, there. A shape, human-sized, but too distorted to make out. It shifted in the corner like a bad reception signal. I froze the frame. The figure seemed to lean forward, bending toward the camera. My stomach turned. The blur was almost like a person. I hit stop. Enough. I reached for the VCR to eject the tape, but the machine made a grinding noise, refusing to release it. I pressed the button again and again, jamming my finger into the slot, but the tape stayed inside. The machine whirred, almost like a low growl, and I pulled my hand back. Static hissed behind me. I turned. The TV was on again, though I hadn't touched the remote. The chair filled the screen only now. Now someone was sitting in it. The figure was turned away, head bowed, shoulders rising and falling in a slow rhythm, as if breathing. The image shook slightly, warped with static. I don't remember turning off the TV. Don't remember stumbling to bed with the lights still on. I just remember the sound of static buzzing in my ears long after the screen went dark. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the chair, plain, wooden, waiting in a room that didn't belong anywhere. By morning I convinced myself it was nothing. Just some weird art project or a home video taped over something else. Still, when I got home from work, the first thing I did was press play again. The tape whirred to life. Static filled the room louder than I remembered. The hairs on my neck stood as if the air itself was charged. Then once again the room appeared. The chair. Silent. Motionless. But it wasn't the same. I leaned forward, squinting. The wallpaper, I could swear it was different. Yesterday it had been plain and pale. Now faint patterns were showing through, as though the image had sharpened overnight. And in the corner of the frame I thought I saw something. A darker patch, not quite a shadow, shifting like it was alive. My hand hovered over the remote. Pause. Rewind. Play. Every time I replayed it, the image seemed to change just a little more. Details I hadn't seen before began surfacing. Cracks in the floorboards, the outline of a door half hidden behind peeling wallpaper, a faint shimmer of movement in the background. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just tired. But each time I replayed it, something new appeared. The tape wasn't fixed. It was evolving. At one point, I paused the image on the chair itself. The wood looked old, splintered at the edges. But that wasn't what froze me. It was the seat, the indent in the cushion. Someone had been sitting there. I felt it. No, I knew it. The silence of my apartment pressed against me. My own chair creaked when I shifted, as if answering the one on the screen. I stood up quickly, suddenly aware of every shadow in the room. I should have stopped. Should have unplugged the VCR, tossed the tape out the window, anything. But obsession is louder than reason. I pressed play again. For a long stretch, nothing happened. Just the empty chair staring back. I almost laughed at myself for being so worked up. But then, at the edge of the frame, something flickered. A blur. My heart stumbled. I rewound, played it back in slow motion. Yes, there. A shape, human-sized, but too distorted to make out. It shifted in the corner like a bad reception signal. I froze the frame. The figure seemed to lean forward, bending toward the camera. My stomach turned. The blur was almost like a person. I hit stop. Enough. I reached for the VCR to eject the tape, but the machine made a grinding noise, refusing to release it. I pressed the button again and again, jamming my finger into the slot, but the tape stayed inside. The machine whirred, almost like a low growl, and I pulled my hand back. Static hissed behind me. I turned. The TV was on again, though I hadn't touched the remote. The chair filled the screen only now. Now someone was sitting in it. The figure was turned away, head bowed, shoulders rising and falling in a slow rhythm, as if breathing. The image shook slightly, warped with static. I froze. My apartment was so quiet I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The hum of the refrigerator down the hall. The faint buzz of the TV. And underneath it all, something else. A whisper. I stepped closer to the screen. The sound was faint, almost buried under the static, but there were syllables. Words. I couldn't make them out, but I knew they were directed at me. I grabbed the remote and shut the TV off. The silence afterward was deafening. I left the living room light on that night. I couldn't bring myself to look at the screen again, but sleep was impossible. Every creak in the walls sounded like footsteps. Every shadow in the corner of my room seemed darker than it should have been. When I finally drifted into a restless half-sleep, I dreamed of the chair. Not the room, not the wallpaper, just the chair, closer this time, the seat empty, waiting. I woke up with the taste of static in my mouth. And the worst part? When I passed by the living room, the TV was on again. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the frozen face on the tape. The man smiling in that impossible way, lips stretched too far, teeth too sharp, eyes unblinking. It burned behind my eyelids like afterimages from staring at the sun. By morning, my apartment felt different. The air was heavy, as if the walls themselves had leaned in during the night. I told myself it was exhaustion, but something inside me whispered otherwise. I made coffee and sat with the VHS lying on the table. I wanted to throw it away, smash it, anything, but I couldn't. It felt like it was waiting for me, like it wanted me to play it again. I held out for hours before I gave in. This time I fast-forwarded. The tape whined, static filling the screen as I skimmed past the first disturbing segments. But then, somewhere near the middle, the static shifted. Patterns appeared, faces flickering in and out, too fast to identify. My name flashed on the screen, letter by letter, distorted and breaking apart like a corrupted file. ETHAN. I dropped the remote. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would drown out the sound. I rewound to make sure. Played it again. The letters were still there, but this time they melted into black sludge, dripping across the screen before dissolving into static. I sat frozen, staring at the snow of the television, waiting for something else to happen. And then I heard it. Not from the TV. From behind me. A whisper. A voice so low it might have been the creak of the pipes or the wind outside. But it said my name, soft and deliberate, like someone standing just over my shoulder. I spun around. The room was empty. I shut the tape off and sat there in silence, listening to the faint buzz of the TV. My palms were slick with sweat. For the first time, I wondered if I had made a mistake even touching the thing. That night, I dreamed of static. Endless corridors of flickering white snow, stretching on forever. Faces appeared in the static, each one warped and screaming silently. Their mouths moved but no sound came out, until all of them said it at once, their voices a low hum vibrating in my bones. Play it again. I woke up gasping, the sound still in my ears. But here's the part that still makes me shake when I think about it. The TV was already on. I never turned it on. And the tape was already playing. The man was back on the screen. The one with the stretched grin. But this time he wasn't frozen. He was waving. Not wildly, not exaggerated. Just a slow, deliberate wave. His eyes locked on mine through the screen as if he knew I was there, awake, watching him. I scrambled to shut it off, jamming the remote buttons with shaking fingers. Nothing worked. The man just kept waving, the corners of his mouth pulling wider and wider until it looked like his face would split open. And then the screen went black. My reflection stared back at me in the dark glass. But there was something wrong with it. The me in the reflection was still smiling. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I thought about leaving the tape somewhere far from me. The dumpster, the river, anywhere. But the idea of letting it out into the world felt worse. Like I'd be responsible for whoever found it next. So I locked it in the closet. Out of sight, at least. Out of mind, I hoped. For a few hours, I convinced myself I'd done the right thing. I went about my day, tried to focus on normal tasks, even answered a few emails. The buzzing in my skull quieted, the static faded from my thoughts. But around midnight, I heard it again. The faint hiss of white noise. Not from the closet. Not from the TV. From the phone on my desk. The screen lit up, glowing in the dark as if it had turned itself on. The display was nothing but static. And buried in the hiss was a voice, faint and breaking, but clear enough that I'll never forget it. "Play it again, Ethan." I hesitated at the threshold of the archive room, my fingers brushing the doorframe as if touching it might anchor me to reality. The moment I stepped in, the air wrapped around me like a cold, damp blanket. Dust hung thickly, motes floating in the flickering light, each tiny speck catching the illumination in a way that made them seem alive, drifting slowly toward me. There was a faint metallic smell, iron, rust, something sharp, and I couldn't place it, though it stirred a vague memory I couldn't grasp. The fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered above, irregularly, throwing jagged shadows across the walls and shelves. I felt my chest tighten as I moved further in. The shelves seemed taller than I remembered, impossibly high, their lines stretching and warping as though the room were breathing, expanding just enough to disorient me. I ran my hand along a shelf, and the edges of the files scraped against my fingers with a soft, almost resentful friction, as if the paper itself resented being touched. I pulled a file from the shelf, its cover brittle and yellowed, the typewritten letters smudged and trembling. I stared at the name, trying to focus, but the ink seemed to shift slightly when I blinked. It was as if the document were alive, reluctant to reveal itself. My heart began to hammer in my chest, and I realized the hum from the fluorescent lights had intensified. It wasn't just the lights. Beneath the hum there were whispers. Low, overlapping, indistinguishable. Not words exactly, but a cadence I felt deep in my chest. I swallowed hard and took a step back, only to find that the aisle behind me had stretched farther than it had a moment ago. Shadows pooled in corners that shouldn't exist. My stomach twisted when I noticed one shadow detached slightly from the wall, stretching across the floor before snapping back like a rope being released. Something moved in my peripheral vision, but whenever I turned, nothing was there. Nothing except the endless rows of shelves and the oppressive silence punctuated by that faint, insistent whispering. Then the computer screen at the far end of the room blinked to life. I hadn't touched it. Its pale glow washed over the shelves in cold light. I squinted. On the screen, a reflection of myself stared back. But it wasn't quite me. Its eyes were too dark, hollowed, and the corners of its mouth twitched in a subtle, unnatural grin that made my stomach turn. I felt drawn to it, against every instinct screaming at me to flee. The stack of files at the end of the aisle toppled over suddenly, papers fluttering like trapped birds. One sheet rose from the pile, floating toward me as if caught in an invisible current. Jagged, uneven letters appeared across it. "Do you remember me?" My breath caught. My mind raced. "Do I?" The words felt impossibly familiar, like a half-remembered name from a dream I couldn't fully recall. I stumbled backward. The whispers grew louder, faster, pressing against my ears, my chest, and my skull. They weren't just sounds, they were sensations creeping under my skin. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound emerged. My own reflection leaned closer on the screen, impossibly close, its gaze piercing mine, patient and knowing. I wanted to move, to run, but my legs refused. I could feel the room shifting subtly around me. The shelves groaned, paper rustled as if alive, and the air thickened, heavy and almost tangible. I pressed my back against the nearest shelf, trying to ground myself, trying to remember that this was real. But reality felt thin here, fragile. I noticed more details. The fluorescent lights above flickered in a rhythm, casting long, irregular shadows. A faint scratching sound came from somewhere behind the rows of shelves, intermittent, deliberate. I tilted my head, trying to locate it, but it was impossible. Could be anywhere, or everywhere. My pulse raced. Every nerve in my body was alive with fear. I wanted to leave, but the exit felt impossibly far, as though the room had stretched again while I wasn't looking. A sudden, sharp tapping echoed from deeper within the archive. Slow. Measured. Like footsteps, or fingernails tracing along metal. I held my breath, straining to hear more. It came closer, then receded, teasing me, taunting me. My mind raced. Was it something in the room, or was it coming from me? I could feel my own heartbeat thrumming in my ears, nearly drowning out the soft whispers now coalescing into tones I almost recognized. Almost. The air grew colder. I wrapped my arms around myself, wishing I could disappear. And then I realized, the room wasn't just alive, it was aware of me. Every shelf, every shadow, every whisper seemed to react to my presence. My hands trembled as I reached for the door, but the aisles had rearranged themselves. The door was still there, but the path to it now twisted and turned impossibly, shelves looming like sentinels. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed by the oppressive weight of the archive. The whispers were now all around me, circling, pressing against my consciousness. I tried to shut them out, to remind myself this was just a building, just paper and dust and fluorescent lights. But I couldn't. Something deep within me, something I didn't want to confront, recognized the voices, recognized the room, recognized me. And then the whispers stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. The fluorescent lights went completely out for a heartbeat, then flickered back. My reflection on the computer screen was gone. The papers lay scattered, lifeless. I was alone, or I thought I was. Then came a soft, deliberate tapping, echoing from somewhere deep within the shadows. I pressed my back against the shelf, unable to move, unable to breathe. My skin prickled. My mind screamed at me to run, to leave, to break free. But somewhere deep in the darkness of those endless aisles, I knew, with a certainty that froze me, that the archive didn't want me to leave. And I realized as I listened to the quiet, that it had been waiting for me all along. I don't remember how long I stayed on my knees in that aisle, paralyzed by the silence that followed the whispers. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to run, but the air itself seemed to push me down, pressing on my chest, holding me hostage. I could feel the room breathing, stretching, and twisting, as if it were alive and conscious, aware of every trembling thought in my mind. When I finally forced myself upright, the aisles around me had shifted. The shelves no longer followed any logic. Rows that had been parallel were now converging, bending impossibly toward the center of the room. I turned in a slow circle, my breath shallow, counting shadows that moved in ways shadows should not. One of them, I could swear, was following me. I moved toward the door, every step echoing in the oppressive silence, but it felt like walking through water. The room resisted. The floorboards seemed to pulse beneath my feet, subtle vibrations like a heartbeat, syncopated with the whispers that had returned, softer now, but more insistent, crawling into my ears and settling into my skull. The computer screen flickered to life again. This time it wasn't a reflection, it was me, but not me. My face stared back at me, eyes hollow and black, grinning in a way I never had. And behind that face I saw something else. Rows upon rows of faces, blurred and twisted, trapped in the screen's light, screaming silently. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I felt compelled, drawn into it as if the room itself had tethered me to that image. The tapping began again, closer this time, circling me. Not random, deliberate. Calculated. It moved with a rhythm I couldn't anticipate, yet I could feel it tracing me, learning me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep them at my sides. I tried to reason with myself. It's just a room. Just files. Just an old computer. But the metallic tang in the air, the oppressive weight, the unnatural shifting of shadows, they all screamed otherwise. And then I saw it. A figure emerged from between the shelves, faint, almost translucent, but unmistakable. The boy from the frame. His eyes met mine, black holes that seemed to pull the warmth from my body. He didn't move like a human. Every step was too smooth, too deliberate, like a puppet manipulated by unseen strings. My stomach churned, my limbs froze. I tried to speak, tried to scream. Nothing. My voice was gone, stolen by the room, stolen by him. The boy tilted his head, smiling with a crooked, unnatural grin. The shadows behind him began to stretch and coalesce, shapes forming, figures I couldn't fully comprehend, yet recognized. They were all watching me, waiting. I realized with a cold, sickening certainty that I had become the newest file, the newest record to be absorbed. Desperation flared. I lunged for the door, but the aisle had twisted impossibly. The shelves pressed closer, corners sharp, almost breathing. I could feel the air thickening, pressing against me, my lungs burning. I stumbled, falling to my knees again. Behind me, the whispers rose, a chorus of voices screaming my name, overlapping until it was unbearable. I scrambled backward, my hands scraping against the shelves. Files toppled over, papers flaring into the air like moths. One sheet landed in front of me, and jagged letters formed, "Stay." I could feel it, not a command but a promise. The room had claimed me, and I was powerless to resist. The boy reached out, his hand passing through the air like it was thick with water. I could feel his presence inside me, tugging, pulling. The shadows behind him surged forward, tendrils of darkness curling around my body, climbing my limbs, filling my vision with shapes and faces and memories that weren't mine. I screamed inside my own head, but no sound escaped. And then the floor beneath me seemed to dissolve. I fell, through nothing, through air, through the space between the shelves. Time warped. Light bent. The whispers became unbearable, 1,000 voices merging into one. A single, monstrous syllable pulling me deeper. I opened my eyes and found myself inside the computer screen. The rows of files stretched infinitely, faces pressed against glassy surfaces, screaming silently. And there I was, my own face staring back at me, hollow-eyed, grinning. The boy from the frame floated above, watching, waiting. I realized then that I would never leave. The archive had consumed me, and outside the room was empty. Fluorescent lights flickered above, lifeless. Shadows lay in their corners, still and patient. The files rested on the shelves, unclaimed. Until the next one came.